Thanks for joining our Asian Allies meeting. My name is Jolene Jang, and I'm going to go over the agenda. So, the meat of what we're doing today is really about the fetishization of Asian American women and their impact. But at our meetings, I try and provide a little bit of what's happening in the Asian community and how we're impacted. So, first, we're going to talk about Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander books to read. I'm going to share with you one that I think is kind of related. And then we'll go over quickly a couple minutes on the safety status for Asian American, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders. And it's not safe. It is not safe, but there are a few wins. And then we'll talk about the impact of fetishization on Asian women and some personal stories, and as well as the segment called Asians to Follow. And we will talk about a couple of movies as well, and a new segment called Asian American First, so we can celebrate what is happening and appreciate those small steps. And then we'll talk about Hope to Hiroshima. This was an event that I went to, remembering the Japanese that we bombed, and hoping for peace with our lantern ceremony. And then action items. So thanks for joining, and you can chat in the chat. So the first thing I want to talk about here is, so books to read. How many of you have seen, have heard of Know My Name, Chanel Miller? She was also known as Emily Doe. Raise your hand if you've heard of this. Okay, Mom. Okay. So, and Kristen. So this was in 2016 is when she was in the news, and she told her story, but it was as Emily Doe. So she is Chinese and white, and she went to Stanford, and she was raped by a white guy. And then she actually put out her victim statement as Emily Doe. And it was, I'll have some links so you can look at the story, but how it was so prolific. So many people saw this and was like, oh, and it made huge news about this young woman being raped. And I think this talks about that as well. It's a long book. It was really helpful. And this was kind of during the Me Too movement, I think. And it talks about, she's a writer, so she already has that skill set. I don't know. It was a really long book, and it was very detailed about how she felt each step of the way, when she was raped, after, and then the thinking about what to do, and then the trial. I think it was a very long trial, and you get to really kind of fishbowl what is it like to be raped, because I don't think we can really know that, but just all the thoughts and all of the questions. Well, what were you wearing? And well, how much did you drink? Were you wearing makeup? And all the questions. And she was painted as the villain, and he's blonde haired, blue eyed, good looking guy, swimmer, all American type guy. It's not gonna, if he gets in trouble, it's really gonna ruin his life. And it was really painted like, well, boys will be boys, and all of that. And so this is a really big story, and great book. And I think that it also helped me kind of understand a lot more of, because I have not been raped, what the types of impact that it has. And I don't know if she identifies as Asian in the book. There wasn't, she could have been a white woman. I didn't really have a sense of that. But this is more the Me Too portion. But I think this is a really important one to talk about. So that's a book that I think is good to read. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Or has anybody read about that or anything?
I have, just from what I heard about the Brock Turner case.
Okay.
It's just amazing, nauseating to me that they were trying to bring up stuff like if she was wearing makeup, because she was unconscious when he was raping her, if I remember correctly. So that's right. That's just incredible that they were using those arguments.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. So he was given, so this, I can't remember now, but it was like a really long trial, and just like every day I mean, it's excruciating. And she was journaling actually while this was going on. And so the Brock Turner, so he's given 6 years, but actually 6 months in jail. It ended up being 6 months in jail, supposed to be, but he actually ended up just doing 3 months. It's like, oh yeah, he's supposed to do 6 years, but then whatever good behavior and oh, he's not the type of guy, you know, then 3 months. So yeah. So pretty tough story. Chanel Miller, who is here, she was on she won a number of awards. She's an artist and a writer. When I was listening to all of her stories, along with the book, but the interviews, it made me think of back in 2001. You know, do I have my impact statement? Is the impact statement when I was a victim, was it filed away? Like what happened with that? And I was reading this. I wrote this in 2018, I think. And I was like, oh, is this my voice? And I was afraid to testify against the perpetrator. So I did it on paper. I was spooked. And actually, I've never thought of this until I read her story. And if I would have testified against my perpetrator, then I think it could have been a different outcome. Because when I advocated for women and children, I fought against voyeurism. I was on Good Morning America. I was on Oprah, Today Show, all the things. And so that personal testimony could have done a better job of saying, hey, you can't look up skirts. Like that's not appropriate. So I think that listening to these stories is really important. And by the way, a little tangential, but as a victim, I hear there's a victim advocate or there's people trying to tell you, they're supposed to tell you what happens. I didn't have any guidance whatsoever. And if somebody had told me, well, you know what, if you personally say something, this is the pros and cons of that. But I didn't know that. So anyways, and I was made to feel guilty, for somebody who did a crime to me. So, I think that this type of story and the things we're going to talk about tonight is really important, to understand. So that's my little book review and my little personal story. So next we're going to talk about what is the safety status for Asians. So I just made this small because I didn't want particularly any Asians to feel triggered by this. Here are the different attacks, and I only put the brutal ones on. And so just to give you a sense, no, Asians are definitely being attacked, and it's really quite brutal and very often. And those, by the way, those are from my website. So I keep the update on the attacks. And then, so this is in Albuquerque. So 3 Muslim men in 10 days. And then there was they think, and this is just a couple hours ago, that this last piece, they think they have the guy who shot him, who also shot another Muslim in Albuquerque last November. Some of the good news, by the way. So Asia's definitely not safe, but the guy who cut the hand of a woman who was, Asian woman walking down the street with a box cutter. So they caught him. So that's great. And the guy who murdered the restaurant delivery, who killed him because he didn't get enough duck sauce a year ago, came back and killed him. So he is no longer on the street. He killed himself. So he's no longer on the street. So this attack was really, I was really surprised because I didn't hear of many attacks a couple years ago. And this is a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. I'm not showing the ones of them injured, and the father. So they were all sliced in the face. And the good news is the guy was caught and is supposed to go to jail for 25 years. And this is in Texas. Another heroic yay. So this is a Filipino guy who's a martial artist, and he's in New York. And this guy on the ground had punched 6 people on his way, just punching Asians along the way. And then, but this martial artist was like, oh no. And so, so they caught him. So that's good news. So yes, attacks on the rise, absolutely. But there are some, it's weird to call wins, but they are wins. So a few less on the street. It really is a fetishization of Asian women. And what is that impact? And if you all can learn what that impact is for us Asians, then you can choose to do something, or also just be a better friend to your Asians when they say something, to just have more of an understanding of what it is. Her name is Rebecca Rose. She's half Korean and half white. This is her channel, and I'm going to play it through YouTube. And she does a great job explaining what yellow fever is.
Yellow fever, or the fetishization of Asian women, is seen regularly today, and it's backed up by a long history. It's when every guy who swipes right on your dating app meets you and says, "Oh, I love Asian women, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese. Oh, I love them all." Why is that, Jimmy? You ask, as you eat the dim sum he ordered specifically for you, because Asian food is just so much better than any other kind of food. Asian women are just beautiful and sweet, and they're all feminine, and they all know how to respect a man, the kind of respect men don't get these days. Oh, Jimmy, you say, as you get up and leave, hoping Jimmy does get the yellow fever, the other kind.
How many of you have heard of yellow fever? Okay, a couple of you. And if there are more Asians here, all the women would say, yeah, very familiar. Actually, Mom, have you heard of yellow fever? So my mom is a traditionalist. So being like 79?
Well,
Not yellow fever.
yeah, I think of it with the war,
Yeah.
the journalists.
It depends which generation. And so my dad was like, no, my mom, maybe not so much, but definitely with younger Asian women, we are all very familiar. Where did the Asian fetish come from?
All non-white groups.
Legislation in the United States, such as the Page Act, discriminated and barred Asian women. They've been stereotyped as a seductress, as subservient, as disease, and we can tie that directly to what happened to the Atlanta shooting.
To get some historical context on how these stereotypes about Asian women could lead to sexual violence, we talked to Dr. Rena Heinrich, who takes a critical look at race and gender in popular culture.
I think that the hypersexualization contributes to Asian fetish. It has roots historically, and then it also has roots in representation. There's this notion that Chinese women who immigrated to this country in the late part of the 19th century were prostitutes, engaged in sex work. We also start seeing representations of Asian women at the end of the 19th century that are specifically written or imagined by white men. So I'm thinking specifically of Madame Chrysanthemum by Pierre Loti, Madame Butterfly by John Luther Long, the play by David Belasco, which then turns, of course, into Madama Butterfly, which is the opera by Puccini. The voice behind all of these narratives is a white male subjectivity. And it's that fantasy of what Asian female body is.
One force behind both the fear and fetishization of Asian people is a concept known as Orientalism.
Orientalism is a term that was coined by cultural literary theorist Edward Said. And what he discovered is that bodies of the East are always represented in a particular way. And that is in opposition to the West. If the West is strong, then the East is weak. If the West is rational, the East is irrational. If the West is masculine, then the East is feminine. If we understand the East as already being feminine, then we see a masculine body as feminine, and we see a feminine body as kind of uber feminine, hyper feminine.
Do you think Orientalism can lead to sexual violence?
It's absolutely possible for Orientalism to lead to sexual violence, because if you have a body that's presenting in front of you that is Asian, but as we understand it through Orientalism, also hyper feminine, also weak, it's horribly damaging.
I think the spa shootings are a good example of this, because I get the impression that the shooter felt himself under the spell of these Asian women. It's almost like he felt himself victimized by his own fetishization, like he had no control over it. They were just, and I think that is a fairly widespread sentiment. So they just feel like they can't control themselves, and they almost blame the women for their, for their feelings.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up. Good tie. Here is an example of back in the day from Full Metal Jacket.
As part of the military brainwashing doctrine, Sergeant Hartman pathologically merges sex and violence. He systematically uses language to associate rifles as tools of sexual expression.
Tonight, your pukes will sleep with your rifles. You will give your rifle a girl's name, because this is the only pussy you people are going to get. I don't want no teenage queen. I don't want no teenage queen. I just want my M14. I just want my M14. This is my rifle. This is my gun. This is for fighting. This is for fun. This is my rifle. This is my gun. This is for fighting. This is for fun.
The point of all this conditioning is to transform the recruit's sexual urges into a tool of violent aggression, to associate pleasure with killing. But an unfortunate consequence is that once in the battlefield, the troops become sexual deviants. The sexual deviance of the squad, who call themselves the lust hogs, is most evident when the ARVN officer brings them a prostitute.
This is my boogie. Hey, we need a bat in order. I'm going first. Now back off, white bread. Don't get between the dog and his meat. Hey, I won't be long. I'll skip the foreplay.
Some sources estimate that over 70,000 prostitutes were active in the Vietnam War, and that many suffered horrendous physical abuse from their military clientele. Gang rape by soldiers was apparently also rife, as it is in most wars.
How much? $15? $15 for both of us. No, each you $15. Me love you long time.
So how many of you have seen Full Metal Jacket? No. Okay. And it's Vietnam, and this is really famous. Like, how many of you have heard "Me Love You Long Time"? Jim has, Lenore has. So "Me Love You Long Time," with that accent. So that is famous. And so people still use that. They still use that in like conversation in that kind of way. So this movie is pretty important. I'd like to see it again. I saw it when I was really young, and certainly I didn't know. And this video, Prostitution and Rape in Full Metal Jacket, I'm going to put it in the chat, and I'll have all these links in case, because this is used for educational purposes, and it's a 9-minute video, but can help show how this masculinity is being used. And I don't think there's any Asian women on here, but this is very familiar, like "Me Love You Long Time," and just the way that people think of Asians. I guess I'll share with you like how this affects me, and when Asians are thought of as a certain way, like, oh, they're subservient, they'll do anything, and they want to be with white men and all of this. Yeah. not great. And so and if you there's stats on that talk about like Asian women on dating sites, and there are specific ones, white guys who want Asian women, and there are a lot of sites like that. When I did date, oh, I love Asians, delete. You may have an Asian fetish or Asian preference. Either keep it to yourself. I don't want to be commoditized. I don't want to feel like I am a object. And so it is impactful in like what I've worn. Like from, I'm a size 2, and but I've always worn size 6 or 8. Since, when I was younger, I always wore several sizes larger. I didn't tuck in my pants, tuck my shirt into my pants, because I didn't want to show off my rear end. And it's not like my mom and dad are alive. It's not like they said, you can't tuck in your pants, you can't tuck in your shirt, my mom is modest, and she's Japanese as well. And, but I wasn't given rules. Hey, you can't wear certain things. But my culture kind of says that. But also when you watch movies like on MTV, Yo MTV Raps, if those of you who remember MTV, you see the babes, that are wearing the low cut high cut, all sorts of things. And then they'll have one Asian there. And so representation was very minimal, but when there was one, she was dressed aggressively. And so we think of her like a street walker or a prostitute. And I don't want to be seen like that. No shame to prostitutes, but like, I don't want to be seen like that. So I have always worn clothes that were too big for me. And it was only till I was 40, when I was 44 or something, that I wore clothes that fit me, that were my size. Because I didn't want to be one of them. So that's called like self-hatred. It's not hating myself, but it's like, oh, I don't want to be one of them. So when I was in college, high school summers, my friend was Vietnamese, Mina, and we love to dance. So we would go to these Vietnamese things and they play the cha-cha. And I'm the only non-Vietnamese person and she speaks Vietnamese. And that, we dance with people kind of, and then the Vietnamese girls, they would wear really tight, skin tight, really short, low cut outfits. And I didn't want to look like I am one of them, because for me, I'm programmed if somebody wears these clothings, then they're a prostitute. And so so that's always stuck with me. And then I'm reminded also with movies when there's the one Asian and she's, prostitute on the TV show or whatever, and she gets killed off. And so there's all these reminders of don't look like that. And it was actually, I went on the Soul Train cruise 4 years ago. Again, I had this conversation with my friend. I'm like, no, it looks good. And in Black culture, they do wear clothes that fit them, what I've seen, and tighter. And so, and I'm very small. So I finally wore something that fit me. But it took a lot of convincing, because I didn't want to be portrayed as this Asian other. Does that make sense? Okay. So I've finally come to okay, I'll wear things that fit me. And I think this is very common for a lot of Asians. I talk to a number of Asians each week, a lot of professional Asians on LinkedIn. And I had this conversation where she was the same. She's like, oh yeah, I wore baggy stuff all the time. And I didn't wear a swimsuit in public until college. I'm like, it was only several years ago. I wore a bikini in public, ever. And it's very common because we are represented so little and represented only a couple of ways that so that is how it has impacted me. I don't know if anybody wants to comment or question or share. One of the questions is, where did the Revealing Clothing Prostitution Association come from you personally? It was seriously like the MTV movies, the MTV and whatever shows, movies. Because also Asians who are acting, they only get the prostitution jobs. They could either be the maid or delivery worker or prostitution. So Emily is a perfumer. We watched a video that talked about Orientalism a little bit. Can you talk about that, Emily, and share that a little bit?
Glad to be here. I don't attend as often as I used to, so I am glad to be here. Could I pose a question, and maybe people could answer in the chat. For those who are familiar with fragrance, or who like perfume or buy perfume or pay attention to perfume in some capacity, are you familiar with the term used to describe a fragrance called oriental or floriental, like floral oriental? So are people familiar with that term? So Olga says yes. Olga, when you hear, well, Renee, that's just fine because we're going to answer it. What that's all about. So Olga, can you describe what a fragrance classified as Oriental is like, or maybe you know of an example?
Anything that is like Japanese cherry blossom scent. I personally have not seen it labeled on any, at least the bottles that I've purchased, from Bath and Body Works.
That sort of, it can be that sort of imagery. It's often also specific. It's a specific type of scent that has notes. So a perfume, a fragrance has what's called notes that you smell, made by materials in the perfume that the perfumer adds and blends together. And ones that are maybe very warm, very resinous, very heavy and or rich, very ingredients sort of like maybe sandalwood or incense, oud, various different kinds of spicy. Yes, that's a great description, Gina. Those kinds of fragrances are often called Oriental. And it's a problematic term for, I'm sure, reasons why all of you understand, or we can talk a little bit about it, but it's problematic also for the sense of that it doesn't mean anything. Just like how I know that Jolene has spoken many times about how many countries there are in what we call Asia. And so to be Asian could mean all different manner of things, from Japan to Egypt, or, where everywhere in between. So this just the term Oriental, it doesn't mean anything. And it's non-descriptive. And it's certainly problematic because of the association with Orientalism. It's also just lazy. Like, what does this fragrance really smell like? We talk about other ingredients that are different kinds of flowers or different kinds of woods, and we don't lump them into some meaningless, problematic category. And there are certain ones, and I don't know if people will, perhaps some of the ladies of a certain age might remember a fragrance called Opium that, I'm trying to look at the chat too. Yeah, sexualized mood. Yes, thank you, Kristen. So Kristen made a comment about, I think with Oriental fragrances, there may also be an association with sexualized mood, sensual, seductive versus floral or citrus, which communicate different moods. 100%, and that's exactly where I was going. So if you may or may not be familiar with a fragrance called Opium that was released long ago by Yves Saint Laurent, and it's still around today and has exactly the imagery that you're referring to just there about sexualizing Asian women. And there's a movement of perfumers, independent and niche perfumers, who, just to, if that term isn't familiar, it's people who run a very small business. You wouldn't find them in department stores. You wouldn't find them in, they're not in Macy's or, different places for the most part, larger ones, but there are a lot of smaller brands, and they're beginning to call attention to this term being problematic, and that we need to change it. We need to change it because it's racist and because we don't want to contribute to that imagery that certainly there's a lot of impact.
Is your question around like what is the impact of the word oriental?
When we use it in fragrances, in particular, because people just accept the word and they just accept that that's the word. I think oftentimes the people who use the word, I don't think that they would call a person oriental, or refer to the Orient or something like that. For the most part, I don't think they would, but they just accept the term oriental as a fragrance description.
Yeah, I mean, it's so problematic what you're saying, and there's so many things that are triggered with me, and even like oriental, like Halloween costumes and certain brands still kind of using those like dragon lady images and oriental images and kind of costumes, like even kind of being at the state fair recently, like people wearing hats, like rice picker hats, but that have, they're just like by oriental hats. So as I'm hearing you talk, for me, and as this conversation seems to be around fetishization, and you're bringing up oriental, for me personally as an Asian female, like where it makes my mind go is like, you're objectifying us. So yes, like there's a sexualization, but it's like, I'm not a rug, I'm not like, there is something about the dehumanization of it. And I do think it's important that when you do hear those terms, to just from an ally standpoint, ask people and say, like, do you see how that's problematic? And to call out companies that are using that. I think that's kind of the big thing. I know that Lululemon had a campaign and kind of t-shirts, and obviously with Abercrombie and Fitch even. Yeah. So I think it's important to point these out to people about how that word is problematic, specifically around objectifying Asian Americans, because I put together the word oriental with objectifying. And for me, then it's like sexualizing as an Asian woman. So really calling it out, like I wouldn't call anybody of any other culture like an object. And that's what you're kind of doing. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And you've said it far better, than I could. It's better from your mouth and your experience. So thank you. And everything that you're saying is exactly what this growing movement of perfumers and brands and fragrance enthusiasts is attempting to do. And we are contacting companies. We have a petition to raise awareness about it, and I can post the link. Jolene is there. She is. Jolene is on it with all the links. So there's a lot of resources there to help people to, oftentimes I know that this comes up in ally groups all the time. I don't know what to say. When I hear such and such or see such and such. Well, in this case, some lovely people have done a ton of work in gathering, see, there we go, articles and information and all kinds of things that we can use to educate ourselves. And then therefore we can, ask people the questions, like Gina, I'm sorry, I missed, I think it was it Gina? I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Yeah, I think it was,
okay. All right, thank you. So this is something that it may, I think it's one of those things that people don't really ever think about often. Fragrance isn't something that a lot of people think about most of the time anyway, but for some of us. And it's an area where we can make an impact on changing the language. It's starting to grow as a movement. I think it's kind of stalled a little bit, but some people are doing all kinds of different sorts of events and awareness raising when it comes to perfumers of color and changing our language in the way that we think about all of that, all those pieces. So there's tons of information and resources for you there.
Here's the information. Here's a petition you can sign. And I want people to know that here, Emily, who's not Asian, but she's in there and she's been on this for, I don't know, like a year or so, and educating me on it. And so no matter what our industry is, we can make a difference in it. So
absolutely right.
Yeah. So
I think it's oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
I just think it's great that it points out something that shows us all the more insidious that it is, because we don't even, I mean, white Americans don't notice or think about it. We don't bat an eye. And that it shouldn't be that way. So I'm glad that you asked me to talk about it a little bit. I appreciate it. And I want to do something for the group. So how about everybody sign the petition that Jolene gave the link for. And if you sign the petition, then, here's what I'll do. I'm going to post this. I'll just make a post for the group. Okay. I'm going to post the link to the petition. When you sign it, comment that I signed it or whatever. And then I'll pick somebody randomly and send you some perfume.
Oh, well, thank you. Great. I like that. Well, thanks.
Oh, hey, did you know that when the French colonies won their liberation, that France gave everyone bottles of perfume? It was classic colonialism.
And we'll end with that. Thank you. Not bad. I was a little scared because jokes are scary sometimes.
Oh my God.
So
I know. But
yes,
it's a play on words.
Yes. So thank you for that. So Orientalism. So take a listen and look at some of those resources, because it is really interesting and it is invasive, insidious in all the different ways. I want to give you a couple examples of how we are reminded. So those of us who are Asian are reminded, Asian fetishization. So this was, was this a month ago? Asian mail order brides, your guide to Asian women for marriage. So this was, I think this was the San Francisco Chronicle or the Austin something. And so because Asians, and I'm not sure if others wrote in to like, hey, you can't take that ad down. And in Austin and San Francisco, where it's really liberal, and here's the history of, SF Weekly, Asian mail order brides, everything you need to know, Chinese mail order brides, where to find a beautiful Chinese wife, choose legitimate, and then find the right. So they've been advertising for a bit here in San Francisco. And then I just watched this video, best Asian countries which offer the best brides. And so it's like, Chinese, I was watching it. It was, I'm not sure. She was a European white woman. And she was saying, Chinese, blah, blah, blah. And they're taller in this region and shorter here. And then the Filipino, they have, so it's just, they're like you're trying to buy a vacuum cleaner or a blender. Not cool. And I said, this was just a video. So I think, freedom of speech. Okay. But when it's an ad, YouTube can remove things, right? Because if I play a video or something that has music, that's removed in a second. Having YouTube ads, I couldn't find it, but I think because I'm always looking at Asian topics on YouTube, it gave me like, buy an Asian wife. And I'm like, this is now. And I'm like, isn't one of the YouTube guys, I thought one of them was Asian. So it's just like, ugh. So this is going on now. Oh, here you go. Yeah. So there's 2019, 29,000 views. And you could click to the chapter if you want to hear about a Thai woman and her advantages. I was wondering, Leslie, do you want to chime in how that makes you feel of any of that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have plenty of thoughts. I have a very visceral response to all these freaking things. I think to Olga's point, right, like that this is still acceptable in the 21st century to have all this like mail order wife propaganda from these major publications. I think the other layer here that's problematic for Asian American women specifically is the imaging around COVID and new variants always tends to be depicted with an Asian woman. I don't know if you saw that one specifically with the Asian woman in the subway. And that makes me really emotional just because we're talking about COVID and variants, and for people to make the connection that Asian Americans are associated Kung flu. But I'm like, it's also problematic because you're depicting an Asian woman in a subway when several have been murdered being pushed into a subway. So there's just this perpetual, like cyclical, like I feel like desensitization going on. So I'm very bothered by it. And so as I was kind of like, sorry that I'm late, but I think we were talking about fetishization, and the point that I like to make to people is that, at least in my experience, and the work that I do and the people that I work with in the community, I think the perception around mail order wives or Asian women being hypersexualized tends to be that only really happens to Asian immigrant women who don't speak English, as if that's like more acceptable or whatnot. For me personally, as someone who was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, I am not 5'1", you know, like I'm 5'8". I have a larger build than most. I'm a self-defense instructor. This rings really, all of these, seeing everything that you're like showing, Jolene, like it's much more than just what the image is, right? Like there's the mail order wife, like it kind of teleports me to so many things, whether that teleports me to the Brock Lesnar trial, to what happened in that rape case. It takes me back to the Atlanta spa shootings. And then when I take myself to the Atlanta spa shootings, then it like transports me to a time in college when I worked in a chiropractic office as a massage therapist, and which is supposed to be a professional environment, and it is not a massage parlor. So people would go in, get chiropractic services, and then get massage. And to be an Asian American woman who's educated, who's in a professional environment, and still have a man grab me by the wrist and ask for his happy ending, like I was terrified. I was terrified because he was twice my size. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know, I can go on for days, whatever you want to know, but like everything that we're talking about today, I'm like, there's like ripple effects, is just the point I'm trying to make. Like just like who was talking earlier about the scents and the incredible work you're doing around scents. I'm like, thank you for the work you're doing, because like when I think of scents, I think of pheromones and smells, right? But then that also brings me to like so many times where like white males have like come up and like sniffed my body and tried to make advances towards me, right? So that's what I'm saying, like it runs deeper for me personally. That's why I think the work that you're doing in regards to the sense is really incredible. But I don't know, and I think that we all have these experiences, but somehow like I'm able to articulate this to this group. Like my mind and heart goes to the women who are laborers, who maybe are immigrated to this country and are cleaning bathrooms. I used to clean bathrooms. So when I think about like massage parlors and all these things, it's like I think about the communities of people that can't stand in their power or advocate or get movements of people to hear their stories and hear their cries. Like we're here and we're a group that wants to do good, but And I'm someone who can definitely share in my platforms to people to build awareness, but there's so many groups of people that are impacted that don't have a voice. So specifically Asian women. And so there's this layer of like women not being believed, right? So we have like Me Too movement, but then there's like Asian women, like, well, that's another layer of victimization, right? So it's like you can be a rape victim, but if you're Asian woman rape victim, like there's this other layer of silencing that goes on top of an assault or a rape because of the retaliation that happens. So I can take that.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that, because when I speak to the rest of you, when I speak, I'm middle class, grew up in white community. I didn't meet anybody, any blue collar workers until 10 years ago. So, I have this privileged piece. And so as we talk in these groups, the working class is not represented. They're out working, and so the way that I learn is through listening to panels and hearing other people's stories, because that is not represented here. So thank you for sharing that. And Leslie, from the people the Asian women that you talk to, would you say that the fetishization is like that everybody can kind of like, yeah, I mean, because it's from all the Asians I've talked to, of course, oh, I love Asians. And I mean, just all these stereotypes. And it's so offensive. Like, I don't even want to talk to anybody who says I love Asians. I'm like, get away from me. Like, I seriously and we actually lost an Asian ally, a white guy who's nearby. And he's really compassionate about, look at all these Asians being hurt and everything. And I'm like, oh, great. We need his help to share. And he's sharing on his wall and everything. And then this thing came up and he sent me a message saying, oh, I think I don't, he kind of, because of this meeting was coming up with fetishization, I think he was like, ooh, I'm going to be probably found out or something. Because a lot of guys who do go, either they study Chinese or Japanese, or they go to an Asian country, then they do like Asian women, fetish or preference, different. That's on a spectrum. But I was just wondering, Lizzie, from your experience talking to a lot of Asian women, what their experiences are with being objectified and
every day, every single moment, and every single second. It's just I'm able to build a community where we can be open in talking about that, because they're tired of being gaslit by other people. Some of them are married to white males. But I can give you screenshots of my Instagram daily, and I have other women that I connect with, and it is disgusting the amount of like privilege that goes on with like men from the military who feel like they can like, this comes down to like unwarranted comments, like and just kind of the trolling that happens and the bullying that happens on social media. I'm not, can
you share just a little, like a gist of that? Because actually I'm not familiar with the social media bullying. So
sure. I mean, like, so for example, I have a profile, people DM me all day. And I have to consciously block them because I have males saying things like, I've never fucked an Asian before. Hey, beautiful. Hey, beautiful. Like, just, I'm looking for a wife, and it's like, it's very clear in my profile what I do in terms of, and it's like, I'm married and I have children. And even at that, there's still daily men that harass me in my DMs. And this is something I talk about with all of the Asian women that I know. And it's just like, okay, well, Leslie, like, it's kind of like second nature to them. So they either just ignore it. Whereas me, like, I literally tell these people, like, I did not ask you for any feedback. Like, like, do not contact me again. See, all of these things, like vocalizing boundaries, it's the work that I do with women, but we all get it as Asian women on social media, on the streets, in the workplace. It's kind of just like second it's not that we experience it any less. Like if anything, it's like way more hush hush than it was before, because they're like, well, nobody cares about Stop Asian Hate. And then specifically when I start working and talking about specifically Stop Asian Hate in the lens of Asian women and that layer of erasure and being dismissed, these Asian women agree, and they're like, what's the point, Leslie? Like I don't even want to, like, because nobody really cares. And that's the disgusting part of this. As if we go really, really dark here about violence, sexual violence, and all this stuff, it's kind of like, well, no one's going to do anything. So I have to either surrender or just let be what be. And that's why my work is very much about standing in their power, giving them a structure on how to use their words, all of the above. But this happens, like, I have clients and I have a community that spans, like, these are women in the Midwest, in conservative environments. They don't have a community of Asian women. And we're all kind of coming together and comparing notes. And and some of them are dating and they want to find romantic love, but then it's like what you experience even just trying to date and actually look for love and a relationship and marriage. Not a mail order wife, but like someone who's just trying to do regular things. It's we all feel it in our veins, but nobody really specifically when it comes to Asian hate and Asian hate towards women. You shouldn't talk about that, Leslie. That's the feedback I get. You shouldn't talk about it. It's too intense. Like, just leave it be. Just leave it be. It's okay. Like, we'll just absorb that. So I can't personally stand for that.
Thank you. Well said. Well said. So any thoughts on what Leslie's talking about? Is this new? Is it different? Is it like, yeah, I've heard it, or?
Can I chime in for one quick second?
Yeah.
I have to go.
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, as always, I just want to say thank you to Leslie and Jolene, and also to Emily. Really great information, and I appreciate hearing your experiences. It's really important because although I've definitely seen the things that you're talking about, it definitely doesn't have the same impact on me because I don't have to go home and live and breathe that 24 hours. I can turn it on or off. So anyways, thank you. And I also just wanted to say, like Jolene, as far as the DEI workshop that you and Kevin are planning on giving, like all the experiences that Leslie's talking about in the massage industry, I think really, again, it's a reminder that this is so needed. So I just wanted to sign off and say thank you, and I'll look forward to next week.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Bye. I was just thinking of your neighbor in next door, Jolene, who's the white guy who said, well, I'm married to an Asian woman and she's never experienced any problems, so it's fine. I wonder if maybe she has, but just doesn't feel comfortable talking to him about that. And that's really sad. So or because she knows that he won't understand or he'll minimize it.
Yeah. Totally true. I no, I don't know her, but that's always, oh, I married a blah, blah, blah. And so you just also, the husband is probably like, it's not a big deal. Get over it. So somebody called you a name, big deal. I was called a name the other day, as if it's the same thing. So I think it's more like you're taught that it's not a big deal. It's your problem. You're the sensitive one. So.
Well, it's really interesting too, because the women in my community, like we meet monthly. And so a lot of them are married to white males.
Mhm.
And so with Asian hate happening, there is a divide, like it creates a very significant rift because you have to talk to your children about these issues. So there's natural, but I think where they are struggling with their partners, their husbands, is that as a white male, you kind of feel like you have a free hall pass because you're married to an Asian woman. Like the verbiage is always like, but I'm married to a Filipino, so doesn't, like I could, whatever, you know, like I could say that, or like, no, like, and dismissing or not being an ally. Like that's the opposite of allyship, right? But like that's all across the board what we're hearing is like, but I'm married to a Chinese, you know, my kid's half Thai.
So there are resources that I'm seeing with from mixed, like the gal that I played earlier, the Happy Project. And by the way, so Happy, I learned Happy like 4 years ago and learned that term because usually I'm used to Hapa, which is a Hawaiian term meaning half. And I usually associate it with Asian, half Asian or mixed. But Happy is also used, and there are mixed, there's a number of like mixed media where there are mixed folks like myself and Joe Coy, who we're going to talk about in a second. He is half too. And so there's a number of us out there who and who have a different, who our partner is a different color, right? And so it is complicated, and it is exciting to see how people will navigate, because they're going to need to. Okay, so let's move to let's see, I'm going to do this. Remove spotlight. Thank you, Leslie. Share. I'm going to go back to share. And I think I want you to hear from a bunch of Asian women, but you won't hear from a bunch of Asian women unless you listen to a panel that is set up. Like this is a kind of a, you know, people don't really want to talk about it, don't want to be seen as complainers, or also it's kind of triggering and tough to talk about. So, but just know that this is really prevalent. If you do see these ads, write in. First of all, tell me about it and tell others about it. And let's write in and like, hey, that's not appropriate. Write to the editor and write to people. That's how we can make a difference. Each time, each meeting, I like to talk about Asians to follow. And we talked about Joe Coy, Filipino American. He's actually from Tacoma, Washington, and he's a comedian and he sells out stadiums. Recently he was dating Chelsea Handler, who's another comedian. He's a big deal now, which is great and well deserved. And so he has Easter Sunday is a movie that's coming out. I wanted to draw your attention to Lou Diamond Phillips. So how many of you knew that he is Filipino? Raise your hand. Okay, well, so he's Filipino, but this is the first time that he's played a Filipino part. He's played everything else. So he's from Texas. He was a military brat. He has 153 acting credits. He was made famous really with La Bamba, Stand and Deliver, and Young Guns. But even this year, he's done five movies or shows. And in high school, he was fourth, you know, the top grades in his class. He was school president for 5 years. He was a football captain. And then he began acting when he was 18. And because he was a military brat, so he traveled all over the place, he didn't get the discrimination until a little bit later, like 18, 19, 20. And I listened to an interview with him recently. Well, actually, if you look, he and Joe Coy are being interviewed like on all the late night shows and the talk shows and everything. Oh yeah. So born in the Philippines. He was in Texas since he was 12. He's Filipino, mostly Filipino, but his mom is also Hawaiian and Chinese. And then his dad is Scottish with a little bit Native American. And I just watched this video with the cast of Easter Sunday, and it was so exciting because they looked at Tia Carrera, who's been in the business for a long time, but Lou Diamond Phillips, Joe Coy looked to him because that was the first Filipino American in Hollywood really making it happen. So, and now they're all in this film together. So we will have a meeting about Easter Sunday and to talk about it. And I'm also going to put a link to this video that I just watched because it is so, you can see the impact of what a difference it is for these Asians to have a movie that they never had when they were a kid. Because Joy Luck Club was the only one when I was younger, and they spoke Chinese and I didn't, it was a little bit beyond my grasp of what a movie was about. Here, this is a movie that's super funny with a lot of big name actors, and they look like they are Asians. So it is a big deal. Oh yeah, Rob Schneider is also Filipino. I wonder if he has ever played a Filipino. Probably, well, there's probably never a script for a Filipino. And then I just wanted to remind you of Amanda Nguyen. We talked about her, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So she's Vietnamese American and she was raped. And so she is getting laws passed to extend that rape kit time. And she's a big deal in this sexual assault survivor piece. So I thought that was related. And Lily Singh, just want to mention her again because she's so funny. So Canadian comedian and hilarious, because I really want you to all start thinking of changing up your feed. And there are actually a lot of Asian comedians on Instagram and ones that are just beginning out there. And then I wanted to bring this up. There's a controversy. So there is a movie called Bullet Train and it's with Brad Pitt. And the story is actually of a Japanese story. And so they whitewashed it. They made it about a white character. And so that's too bad. So, I teach about what is yellow face and whitewashing. I'm hoping that yellow face, when you pretend to be Asian, you put makeup on to pretend you're Asian. I hope that is gone. That should be not allowed. But still robbing the stories of a Japanese story, and it was set in Japan too. So I just found out about that today, so I haven't looked in it too much. But so I want to start this new section called Asian American First. So I want to share a few with you. So University of Michigan has their first Asian American college president. I don't know if there are other ones, but yay. And then California, the first Filipina Chief Justice is retiring, but she was the first woman justice, or second, let's see, first or second. So that's a big deal. And then this was the twin sisters. They're the first Asian Americans, at least in Brooklyn, to become Eagle Scouts, because girls were only allowed to be in Boy Scouts, I think 3 years ago. Then another piece of good news is this is in New York. So Mayor Adams, they will start in the fall. They will have Asian American history in New York City schools in the fall. So I think that is the earliest that we will see Asian American history anywhere. And still, John Liu is fighting to get New York schools. So that is the main of what I have to say. And so here's some action items I want to invite you to do, to watch the full clips that I referenced at our meeting, and share these individual clips also with others. Like, oh, do you believe this? Or, oh, I didn't know this. And this, I didn't realize, because you want to share with your friends why they should watch it. And be aware of fetishizing comments and combat them. Or like, why did you say that? That's not appropriate. Do you realize that, that this impacts Asians in this kind of way? Sign that petition that Emily is working on, and share what you learned from tonight. And I am recording this video so other people can see it. And I don't think I'm going to edit it. So